In January 1967, a small group gathered in Belfast and believed that everyone in Northern Ireland deserved equal rights, regardless of their religion or background. They called themselves the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. What started as a modest pressure group would ignite a movement that captured global attention, challenged a government, and changed the course of Irish history forever. The people who dared to demand justice, and the brutal response that made the world finally pay attention. The 1960s were a pivotal decade for the civil rights movement across the globe. In Northern Ireland, Catholic people faced systematic discrimination in housing, employment, and voting rights. Political power was concentrated in the hands of the unionist government at Stormont, and complaints fell on deaf ears. The association was born from this frustration. Modeled after Britain's National Council for Civil Liberties, it brought together an unlikely coalition. Nationalists, Republicans, Labour Party members, Communists, trade unionists, and even some liberal Protestants. Their first secretary was Derek Peters. Noel Harris became chairman, with Con McCluskey as vice chairman. Among the founding members was Betty Sinclair, a Protestant communist and trade unionist, who would become chairperson, a powerful symbol of the movement's non-sectarian vision. The association had clear objectives: defend individual rights, highlight abuses of power, and inform the public of their lawful rights. They focused on 7 specific injustices, including discriminatory council house allocations, the weighted voting system, and gerrymandering. Crucially, they deliberately avoided the question of Irish unity. This wasn't about partition, it was about fundamental human rights. The association's approach was strategic. They wrote letters to the government about harassment, produced pamphlets and leaflets, and organized public meetings. They addressed not just discrimination against Catholics, but also the rights of the mentally ill and children from poor Protestant areas like Sandy Row. This non-sectarian approach began to yield results. While Catholics made up the majority of members, the movement attracted Protestants, too. Leaders like Sinclair and Ivan Cooper, chairman of the Derry Citizens Action Committee, both came from Protestant backgrounds. But building this coalition wasn't easy. There were tensions between socialists and Republicans, between those seeking gradual reform and those wanting revolutionary change. Internal conflicts were frequent, even as the association projected an image of unity. In August 1968, they organized their first major march from Coal Island to Dungannon. But it passed peacefully. There was no violence, no media interest, and no real impact. Some wondered if the association would fade into obscurity. October 5, 1968. The association organized a second march through Derry, planning to pass through a Protestant district. What happened next would change everything. Northern Ireland's Home Secretary, William Craig, was determined to suppress the civil rights movement. He ordered police to attack the unarmed marchers. As television cameras rolled, the Royal Ulster Constabulary charged into the crowd with batons. Dozens of ordinary people were injured. Rubber bullets were fired at protesters' heads and bodies. The world watched in horror as peaceful demonstrators were beaten in the streets. The marchers lost the battle on the streets that day. But they won something far more critical: the propaganda war. 1968 was a year of global revolt. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated in April, and civil rights movements were erupting worldwide. The images from Derry were broadcast across the planet. The British press was virtually unanimous in supporting the Catholics' demands for civil rights. The British government could no longer ignore Northern Ireland. The day after what became known as the Battle of Derry, the association's supporters marched to Downing Street and rallied in Trafalgar Square, demanding intervention and democracy. Prime Minister Harold Wilson, who harbored ambitions of uniting Ireland, finally acted. He summoned Northern Ireland's leaders to London and pressed for reforms. In January 1969, the government formed the Cameron Commission to investigate the civil disturbances. Their findings vindicated the association completely. Of the 7 general causes of disorder they identified, 6 were Catholic grievances, precisely the issues the association and the Irish Democrat in London had been campaigning about. Housing discrimination, gerrymandering, the B Specials, the Special Powers Act, and the failure to address complaints. But the victory came at a cost. Unionists viewed the civil rights movement as a communist and Republican conspiracy to reopen the border question. Counter-demonstrations turned violent. Communal tensions that the association had tried to bridge began to tear apart. The movement that sought to unite Protestants and Catholics around common rights had unleashed forces that would divide them for decades to come. The association achieved their immediate goals, exposing discrimination and forcing reform. They proved that ordinary people, when organized and determined, could challenge even the most entrenched systems of power. But they also helped trigger the Troubles, 3 decades of violence that claimed thousands of lives. History doesn't offer simple heroes or villains. The association was a civil rights movement in an impossible situation, trying to do what they believed was right. Their message remains as relevant today as it was in 1967, that everyone deserves equal rights, equal dignity, and equal justice under the law. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please share, like and subscribe for more videos exploring Irish radical history and the hidden stories behind the headlines.